Welcome, everyone, to another Catholic Family News special report. And today I'm happy to be having a conversation with Father Michael Rodríguez. Thank you for joining us today, Father.
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
I know many of our viewers know Father. He spoke at our conference, which doesn't seem that long ago, but over 2 years ago, back in Chicago in May 2019. And a recording of that conference has been available on our video channel. And I know we've gotten many people, Father, respond to that. We're very inspired by your conference. And some of them said, "Where is this priest? I want to move wherever he is," I think was one of the comments. So you were very inspiring. But today our topic is going to be that which has been on many people's minds for the past 2 weeks now. That is the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, in which Pope Francis really, I mean, we haven't made many, we've not tried to be euphemistic about it here. It's launched essentially an attack on the traditional Latin Mass, which our viewers know has really grown dramatically since 2007, when Pope Benedict XVI really encouraged more wide use of it and made it, tried to remove some of the stigmas, I guess, or the disincentives against it. So, Father, I know, as I said, you've told your story in greater detail, but could you maybe just recap for us kind of how long you've been a priest, in what year you started saying the traditional Mass, and kind of and last part, what effects Summorum Pontificum actually did have on you and the traditional Mass?
Okay. Again, for those who maybe do not know me, my name is Father Michael Rodríguez, and I am a priest of the Diocese of El Paso, Texas. This year, I will, God willing, celebrate my 25th anniversary as a priest on December the 8th. So I was ordained December the 8th of 1996. And I began to offer the traditional Latin Mass about 9 years later. So pretty much, I'd say for about the first 8 years of my priesthood, I really didn't know anything about the traditional Latin Mass, although my seminary formation was basically with the Novus Ordo. And so towards the end of 2005 is when I began offering the traditional Latin Mass. And then by the time Summorum Pontificum went into effect on, I believe it was September the 14th, 2007, on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, I was ready by then. I had already been offering the traditional Latin Mass a couple of times a month prior to that. But once Summorum Pontificum went into effect, then I began offering the traditional Latin Mass every single day. And at the time, in my parish, what I was doing was I was offering both the Novus Ordo and the traditional Latin Mass. That until 2011, and then beginning in 2011, roughly also around September of 2011, so it's going to be 10 years now, I began offering exclusively the traditional Latin Mass. So it's almost been 10 years now that I've only offered the traditional Latin Mass. And that really I've dedicated my priesthood, I would say 100%, to recover, obviously, not only the traditional Latin Mass, but all our authentic Catholic doctrine. We might say just really all of what is truly Catholic, all our different practices of piety, discipline, etc., that sadly have been in many ways lost over the past 50 years. And we absolutely have to do everything possible to recover all of this, basically our Catholic faith. And so that's what I've really been working hard at, I'd say pretty much exclusively over the past 10 years. I think you asked, Brian, about the effect of Summorum Pontificum, specifically on me, and I think overall for the church. I would say that in general, positive. I mean, even at the time when Summorum Pontificum was first promulgated, I mean, I like I think many, traditional Catholics could see still a lot of problems with that document. I mean, it certainly wasn't the best, and
it wasn't perfect. No,
right? No, not at all. And there, plenty of I think also even we might say inaccuracies there. But I do think that by the grace of God, it has helped. I think it certainly helped me personally because it made it easier for me at my parish to begin offering the traditional Latin Mass every single day, even though my bishop was against it. I mean, at the time in September of 2007, I'd say pretty much my bishop at the time and pretty much all the clergy of my diocese were against the traditional Latin Mass. And so because of Summorum Pontificum, it made it easier for me in terms of, let's say, just you might say the legal or canonical ramifications of in the church, made it easier for me to offer the traditional Latin Mass every single day. And there was great fruit because of that. I mean, it was really incredible what I witnessed in my own parish. It was a small parish. I mean, it's actually, the name of the parish was San Juan Bautista Parish there, in our diocese of El Paso, Texas. It was actually one of the smallest and poorest parishes in the diocese. And yet, over the course of 4 years, from 2007 to 2011, and this was once I began offering the traditional Latin Mass every single day, I was just amazed at the increase of just faith, devotion, piety among the faithful as a whole, and particularly those who were making an effort to really learn about the traditional Latin Mass, because obviously it wasn't easy for many of them, but they were making the effort, and I was doing my best to help them along. But in particular, I want to mention the flourishing of vocations, in both vocations to the priesthood and religious life. In that 4-year period, quite certain that the number of vocations and some today, we're talking about 14 years later, we now have priests and religious that their vocations actually, we might not, I would say began, but I mean, they really, took a step forward during that time when I was offering the traditional Latin Mass at San Juan Bautista Parish, thanks to Summorum Pontificum, which was the question. But in that 4-year period, the number of those vocations to priesthood and religious life from that one small parish in the diocese, I think, was possibly 3 to 4 times the number of the total vocations for the entire rest of the diocese. And we're talking about a diocese of over 500,000 Catholics. So, but basically, Summorum Pontificum, I think, did have that positive effect, and kind of gave me, I would say, the call it the canonical backing to kind of really push ahead to promote the traditional Latin Mass. And it certainly also helped me because as the years went by, those years 2007 to 2011, I became more and more convinced that whatever the consequences, I had to begin offering exclusively the traditional Latin Mass, that for the good of the church, for the good of souls, and really to be truly faithful to Christ and the Catholic Church, that I had to work towards this restoration of our Catholic Mass and our Catholic faith 100%. And so I was able to do that in 2011. But again, I'd say certainly partly crediting Summorum Pontificum for that. Well, now I think we're, with God's, again, help and the help of our Blessed Mother, we're ready now for the next challenge, because we certainly have a challenge here on our hands with the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes.
Before we turn to that, I had 2 follow-up questions from what you said. One, you mentioned the small, poor parish in the diocese, and one of the things that I've seen read by those who are defending Traditionis Custodes and the attack on the Latin Mass among the internet circles is, oh, well, that Latin Mass, that's just for sort of privileged, wealthy. It's so no diverse. There's not, it doesn't appeal to different people, which from my own perspective is kind of, I find ironic, because the Novus Ordo parish where we were before finding the traditional Mass was the most kind of homogeneous, non-diverse place that I'd ever seen. But again, from your experience, did you find that the people coming were, that lacked any kind of ethnic or different diversity, or that, again, how would you answer that from your experience, that allegation?
No, well, I would say I think it's completely untrue. And again, from my perspective, and also from really everything that I've also heard from, let's say, other priests and other members of the faithful, I think that it's clear for those of us who are um, in this effort to restore and to promote the traditional Latin Mass that we are experiencing and seeing something very different, namely that we pretty much, I think, have Catholics from all walks of life that are being attracted to the traditional Latin Mass. But I would emphasize also in my experience, I would say that in my experience, it's in particular the younger Catholics. It is impressive to see the younger Catholics, and I would say the ones who are more serious about their faith, though. I'd say the younger Catholics that really you can tell that they really want to be Catholic. They have a desire to be more faithful Catholics. Basically, their faith is important to them. That they particularly are drawn to the traditional Latin Mass. I've even seen that recently in the last couple of years, where I've been now pretty much I've been carrying out my priestly ministry in a private capacity for the last 7 years, because my current bishop, approximately 7 years ago, removed me from the last assignment that I had as a diocesan priest. Basically, it was, and the issue was pretty much in the traditional Latin Mass, because at that time I was in a small little mission church in the diocese in the town of Shafter, Texas. It's pretty much a ghost town. I mean, there maybe about 50 inhabitants.
Wow.
It's about 20 miles north of a larger town, but we're still talking about the extreme limits of the diocese. And that town is Presidio, Texas. That town has about maybe 5,000 people. So Shafter is about 20 miles north of Presidio. But anyway, that was the last assignment where I was at. But basically, I was only offering the traditional Latin Mass in that small little mission church in Shafter, Texas. I think at the time, I think it's an interesting kind of, I don't know, maybe not statistic, but I think it's interesting to note that in the period that I was there in the Shafter mission, which wasn't too long, but as the administrator, I think El Paso may have been the only diocese that had, in the United States, that had two basically parishes that were exclusively dedicated to the traditional Latin Mass, because our new bishop, I say new bishop, but at the time he was a new bishop, because when he removed me from Shafter was at the end of 2014, and he was installed as the new bishop in, I believe it was July of 2013. So he'd only been bishop of the diocese for a year at that time. But anyway, in August of 2014, so just a few months before he removed me from Shafter, he did bring in the priestly fraternity of St. Peter into the diocese. And I think probably the main reason was because there were a lot of the faithful in the city that, because I had been moved out of the city and sent out into the, let's say, boonies, into exile in the diocese, there was no Latin Mass. There was no more Latin Mass in the city, and so a lot of the faithful that had come to know and love the Mass, really love our faith, they'd been petitioning the bishop, and even Rome at the time. And so, thanks be to God, our new bishop, Bishop Seitz, he did bring in the priestly fraternity, so that let's say, call it a pastoral need. Which also is a bit, I don't necessarily like that the best, but, to satisfy, let's say, this pastoral need, brought in the priestly fraternity of St. Peter. But anyway, the point was that they then had a parish at that time when I was in Shafter. They had a parish that was pretty much exclusively dedicated to the traditional Latin Mass, and then I had one out in the rural parts of the diocese as well. The problem was that what I was doing, well, the bishop really wasn't behind it, and so he began to insist that I offer also the new Mass. And
so,
go ahead.
No, I was just saying it's an important story you tell, because it's a reminder that this is years before what just happened in July, that even under Summorum Pontificum, bishops had a lot of ability to, I mean, there's no other word for it, persecute priests that are committed to the Mass, and like you said, isolate them or so as bad as this is, I mean, it's a bad thing for the church. As a reminder, it's a difference, but it's not as big a difference as some might make out. It really, in the past, depended on the particular bishop in an area if he's going to leave you alone or support you. And again, there's maybe some more tools that the bishops have now if they want to do that, but it was going on before.
Right. I think it's a good point, because it's one thing also that I believe I preached about this to the faithful on the first Sunday after Traditionis Custodes was published. So that was on July 16th, I believe July 18th. I believe on Sunday, July the 18th, is when one of the things that I mentioned to the faithful is I told them, look, it's most likely that from this point on, there's going to be greater persecution of the traditional Latin Mass and of us and of our faith. And I said, but look, we have to persevere no matter what. We have to pray and ask God for the graces necessary to persevere, to stay the course. And I told them, because look, I said, a lot has been accomplished, let's say worldwide and also here in the United States since Summorum Pontificum, in terms of making the traditional Latin Mass more available to a lot of the faithful and opening the eyes and I think hearts of many Catholics to the crisis that is taking place in the church and the main solutions that we have to work towards. Again, namely, our lex orandi as Catholics and our lex credendi as Catholics, our true Catholic Mass and authentic Catholic doctrine. So I told them, look, a lot has been accomplished, but that is also in large part, humanly speaking, due to all of the sacrifices and the persecution endured by many of our let's say, I don't want to say ancestors, but those that came before us in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. We're talking about in the 1970s, the 1980s, 1990s, even we might say going all the way up to Summorum Pontificum, there were plenty of sacrifices being made, priests and faithful being persecuted. But one of the fruits of that was let's say, greater flourishing of the traditional Latin Mass during the period of Summorum Pontificum, 2007 to 2021. And so now we've got to, do our very best to be faithful and to persevere no matter what, trusting that God has his plan and that sufferings or sacrifices that we endure now, that they will yield a very precious fruit for the Catholics, both present and of the future. But going back to what I was saying about in Shafter, Texas, so I was there, and so the bishop began to insist that I offer the new Mass, and it was really kind of a sad situation because he was trying to use the argument of saying, well, there are people that also want to go to the Novus Ordo. But it was such a unique situation that wasn't the case, because there was basically no one in the little town. And so the people that were coming to the traditional Latin Mass were pretty much the faithful from Presidio, the larger town, that were willing to drive, let's say, the 20 miles to go to the traditional Latin Mass. We actually even had some people that were coming to the Latin Mass from some of the other rural towns, anywhere from, I would say, maybe 50 to 100 miles away. Wow. And we even had, it was remarkable because about once a month, we even would get a group of faithful from the city, from El Paso, that basically learned about the Latin Mass while I was at San Juan Bautista. About once a month, they would caravan out to Shafter for the Mass. And so that was another group of, I'd say, it would vary, but I would say it was usually between maybe 50 and even up to about 40 people that would come out about once a month for that Mass. And for them, it was an all-day affair because they would leave El Paso, let's say maybe about at 6 a.m. Then we'd have the Mass. I think the Mass was about at 11. The people that would come from El Paso coming over would lose an hour because there was an hour difference. El Paso's on Mountain Standard Time and Shafter's on Central Standard Time. So then after Mass, we'd have, like a potluck, a gathering. And then the faithful from El Paso would stay for, a while. And they'd probably be leaving Shafter anywhere from about maybe as early as 2:33 in the afternoon to maybe 4 or 5, they'd be getting back to El Paso at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. So it was an all-day affair for them. But anyway, the whole point was that I told my bishop at the time, I said, look, Bishop, everybody that's coming here to the Mass is coming specifically for the traditional Latin Mass. There's no point in offering the Novus Ordo because there's not even a quote unquote pastoral need for it. So, I mean, the evidence was really stacked against him. I mean, I was pleading with him to allow me to continue there doing my work. I encouraged him to talk to the faithful. I said, look at the fruits. I said, we're doing very well. Little by little, the numbers are growing. The faithful are very pleased. The faithful even sent, it was impressive, the petition they sent to him, because I'd say in Presidio, maybe regular churchgoers, maybe about, I don't know, I'm going to guess maybe about 800, let's say, maybe 800 to 900 faithful. I'd say that close to maybe 20% of those, maybe a little bit under 20%, but maybe just under 20% of those signed a petition asking Bishop Seitz to leave me in Shafter, Texas.
Wow.
Because many of them, even though they did not necessarily go to the Latin Mass in Shafter, Texas, they saw a great value in having me there nearby, because sometimes, it's in the rural parts of the diocese. And for example, if the priest in Presidio, let's say, were sick or just were unavailable, they needed a priest, well, I was nearby. Many of them would also go to Shafter for holy hours or confession, or to have me bless things, because, that was more readily available there than in their own parish in Presidio. But anyway, it's just very sad, because all the evidence was in favor of leaving me there in Shafter. The faithful were asking for it. I was asking for it. One could see the good fruit that was there. But because I, in conscience, could not offer the new Mass, my bishop then removed me from the little mission in Shafter. And basically, since then, has never gave me another pastoral assignment. So I've kind of been left in limbo. But since then, I've been just trying to, as best as I can, privately carry on my apostolate to promote and restore the traditional Latin Mass and Catholic doctrine. And so, that's what I'm still doing now. I've got kind of like a little private chapel set up and still working on that. But again, I still see, I think I began here because even just recently in where I'm offering Mass, it's interesting to see the number of young families that have begun to familiarize themselves more with the traditional Latin Mass, our Catholic faith in general, and again, bearing great fruit for them and for their families.
Well, listening to that,
the question you had asked was, I guess about, if it's elitist but I'd say far from it. Yes. And actually, I think one interesting thing that I think is also important to note, especially in light of the argument that's made by Traditionis Custodes, where Francis is basically trying to make the argument that the reason why he's taking this step, very drastic and really diabolical step, is for ecclesial communion, for the unity of the church. Yes. And it really is there are many reasons I think that we can see the hypocrisy in this, but it's really the other way around. I mean, that what really is going to bring unity in the church is, one right, but the right that has always been the right of the Catholic Church, the Roman right of the let's say the Western Church. All of us being faithful to what is truly the Catholic Mass is what will bring unity to the church, because unity in the church has to be founded on and rooted in true Catholic doctrine and true Catholic worship. But on a kind of more experiential level of this, it's what I witnessed when I was there, and especially at my parish in San Juan Bautista, but even ever since then, but particularly there, because there we had a lot of the faithful that their first language is Spanish. And so what was remarkable was that even in the new masses that I was offering there at the time at San Juan Bautista, what I had done was I had tried to bring the Novus Ordo as much in line as possible with the traditional Latin Mass. So I was offering the new Mass ad orientem. We had installed a communion rail. Everybody received Holy Communion on the tongue. We were really trying to emphasize the importance of having that Catholic reverence for the real presence of our Lord in the Holy Eucharist. I was using exclusively the Eucharistic prayer number 1, which basically is the Roman canon. Not exactly; there are also issues there, but
Yes.
I was using the Eucharistic prayer number 1 and praying it all in Latin at the Novus Ordo Masses. I was trying to pray many of the ordinary prayers of the Mass, like, for example, the Agnus Dei, the Gloria in Excelsis Deo, the Pater Noster in Latin, so that the faithful little by little would become familiar with the Latin. My plan there also was because for the faithful that were more resistant to the traditional Latin Mass that was available there at the parish at the time. My plan was, well, little by little, I'll get them to the point where making the transition. My plan was always at some point, we're going to try and get them all to the traditional Latin Mass. It won't be as difficult. It won't seem as difficult for them because they will already have some familiarity with the traditional Latin Mass.
No, it's interesting that you mention in that context.
So, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I said interesting you mentioned that context. A lot of people whose first language is Spanish. Because at one point in our prior life, we were in a parish, a Novus Ordo parish, that had a lot of Spanish-speaking people, but I actually never saw them because in that parish, everything was, ironically segregated. So they had their own Spanish Mass.
Right, Brian.
Where again, now I'm in Florida, and here we have a huge community of people from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Mexico, a large, and I see them every day because we're all going to the same Mass as opposed to our own separate little Mass. Yeah.
Right. That's my point. My point is that in San Juan Bautista, it was really edifying for me to see how just the Latin, I'm not even talking yet about the Latin Mass, but just the Latin in the Novus Ordo was really bringing the parish more together. Because I began to see some of the faithful that spoke pretty much only Spanish. They were more willing to go to the Mass that was, let's say, in English, Novus Ordo, because they were already familiar with the Latin prayers that were being used in both the Spanish and, let's say, English Novus Ordo. And it really began to bring, it was slowly, it wasn't something like dramatic from one day to the next, but I could really begin to see how just our sacred language as Catholics, Latin, was beginning to little by little bring unity to the parish. And I'd say even more so the traditional Latin Mass, because the traditional Latin Mass, it's not just bringing that unity on what I would call maybe a little bit more of a superficial level, meaning the language, the Latin language, but it's bringing the faithful together and bringing that true Catholic unity in a more profound way, which has to do with praying with great Catholic faith and devotion, our faith, the prayers of our Catholic religion, offering the worship and adoration to God that not only all of us are offering as Catholics right now in this time, but across the centuries. Bringing also this unity, not just in terms of space, geographical space, like everybody today offering the traditional Latin Mass, but bringing that true supernatural Catholic unity across time also. Remember, God is eternal, and there are aspects of our worship that also have that eternal aspect to it, but also bringing that unity of the church across the centuries, which only the traditional Latin Mass can do. And so the whole point there, though, being is that I think for anyone that is honest, certainly for anyone that really has spent more time studying, appreciating, and really even living the traditional Latin Mass, there can be no question that one of the most powerful instruments that the Holy Ghost uses to really bring about that unity in the Catholic Church is the traditional Latin Mass, which is precisely also why throughout history, the Supreme Pontiffs have made such an effort to religiously, guard and transmit faithfully our lex orandi as Catholics. I mean, obviously, this being done until that first chaotic break at the time of Pope Paul VI.
Yes.
With the introduction of basically a new rite that broke with pretty much a 2,000-year liturgical tradition in the Catholic Church.
Yes. Well, you certainly had a moment of choice, there where, your choice was to compromise on the principle and offer the new mass or do what you did and remain faithful. Could maybe get your thoughts on how you might advise or talk to some priests now who are facing or getting ready to or have already faced a similar choice. And I've spoken to a few priests over the past few weeks, one in particular, who very, very good priest, struck me very sincere, really care for the faithful, love the church. But here's their quandary. Here's what they, some of them, and again, I'm kind of conflating a few different people, but if we take sort of in general, maybe this argument, I really care about the faithful. I've been doing many things you're saying, offering traditional mass, trying to move people towards it. And I'm afraid if, I don't comply with the bishop, if I don't stop saying the traditional mass, if I just, say Novus Ordos along with it, the bishop's going to send me away like he did to you. And I'm going to abandon these people that I've been helping and who he may send into modernists. So isn't it better, they might say, that I compromise and do this thing? Actually, one of them even said, hold my nose and say the traditional mass, hold my nose and say the Novus Ordo so I can stay with these people. Again, understanding that sentiment, saying, maybe I should do this just to stay with the people rather than get sent away. What might you say in response to an argument or like that, or a concern like that?
I mean, it's a good question, Brian, because I think it's also a very real question. And
yes.
I do think that there's any number of, my brother priests that are facing this situation.
Yes.
I certainly am sympathetic to their plight because I'd say that for the 4 years that I was in San Juan Bautista offering the traditional Latin Mass, I kind of was in a similar situation where I knew that I pretty much had to keep on offering the new Mass just to be able to do what I was doing. I could see a lot of the good that I was doing in, every day offering the traditional Latin Mass. I mean, I could see the direction of the parish little by little moving in the correct direction. So I can certainly sympathize with those brother priests of mine, but my counsel would be, and again, it doesn't mean that, that God's grace is not going to work in the particular situations that they're in. I mean, who are we to be able to put limits to the way that God will work? So it's not, I wouldn't argue necessarily at that level, but I would encourage those brother priests of mine. I would say, look, I certainly understand your situation. I mean, I've been in it, but I do think that given the gravity of the crisis in the church today, given also the fact that we have to fight not only for our, let's say particular groups of faithful, but we also have to fight for the church as a whole. And for many of the faithful right now in different parts of the world, they don't even have any access to the traditional Latin Mass. And ultimately, I would say, I think the ultimate reason is because it has to do with the truth of what is the Catholic Mass, what is Catholic worship, and what is also our Catholic doctrine. And the fact that the primary way that Catholic doctrine is transmitted into the minds and hearts of the faithful. And again, this is done also supernaturally, that the primary way is through the lex orandi of the church. And again, the primary example of that lex orandi is holy sacrifice of the Mass. So basically, I would encourage those brother priests. I would say, look, I think you have to, and I think it's going to be difficult, but I think the best option is to make whatever sacrifices are necessary and commit yourself 100% to offering the traditional Latin Mass and really place yourself in the hands of God and entrust yourself to our Blessed Mother, and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, God is faithful. I mean, in some ways, I would say, certainly in some ways, I've done that, and I've been amazed. I mean, I've been amazed at how God has responded, and how, in many, many ways, I've been able to promote the faith in ways that I would not have been able to had I, let's say, remained in, let's say, the parish where I was, let's say at the time, even let's say San Juan Bautista Parish, or even in Presidio and Shafter, where I was for a total of about 3 years, in both in Presidio and Shafter. I know also a very difficult situation for the priests, as we wonder, because I mean, I've gone through it, and I'm still going through it, because we wonder about, well, what's going to happen if our bishops, impose certain canonical penalties? Let's say they suspend us, or even go so far as to try and excommunicate us, or take away our salaries. I mean, basically, my salary was taken away. My priestly salary was taken away more than 7 years ago. Well, no, about 7 years ago. Ever since 2014 is when my bishop, he basically took away my salary and just reduced me to giving me a $400 a month stipend. And that's pretty much the way it's been for the last 7 years. And even at the time when he did that, I mean, it was totally unjust, because he was granting me a sabbatical. I mean, it was the assignment that he was giving me for, I think at the beginning it was like for 6 months. So he gave me a sabbatical, and in spite of giving me the sabbatical, took away my salary and left me with a $400 a month stipend, which has remained. So, I mean, and then it was interesting, because a couple of years later, after, he, I guess, maybe realized that, I wasn't going to be offering the new mass, he was threatening to take away my health insurance. And so, I mean, it's these kinds of, I think, issues that the priests also face. But, I can assure the priests, look, God does provide. He really does. And I mean, he's provided in my case. I mean, right now, I think I still have a kind of minimum health insurance with the diocese, but I think part of the health insurance has already been taken away. And I think that it's very possible in the near future, particularly also because of now these new norms with Traditionis, Custodes. I think it's very possible that in the possibly very near future, my bishop might even go so far as to take away that stipend, or take away whatever health insurance I have left, or suspend me, or hit me with whatever penalties he's going to hit me. But I'd say, all of those things are secondary when we, I think, truly put the truth of what our Catholic religion is first. Our Catholic worship, and our Catholic doctrine, lex orandi, lex credendi. And I think that has to be the number one factor in helping us as priests determine what we're going to do. And we do have to trust in God. But I will say this, look, I mean, we're also going to face all kinds of different challenges. I mean, I've faced all kinds of challenges as well in the last, especially in the last 10 years. But again, God is faithful, and he gives us the necessary graces. But, I would also encourage the priests. I'd say, look, believe me, and I know of many personally. They contact me. I can give them directions. I mean, as far as, like, let's say who to contact. But there are a lot of Catholic faithful right now, a lot of traditional Catholic faithful that are begging for the traditional Latin Mass, that are begging for priests. They're just not priests to offer the Latin Mass for them. And so, because many of them even ask me, I mean, they've asked me, I mean, from different parts of the United States to even different parts of the world. I mean, right now it's an interesting situation. For example, even in Panama, the country of Panama in Central America, I actually, and again, by the grace of God, have actually had a hand in working to try and establish the traditional Latin Mass there for the faithful. A couple of years ago, there was not a single traditional Latin Mass in the entire country. But now, thanks be to God, I think and this is just pretty recently, I think the SSPX is now going on a monthly basis to offer Mass there. And I would also be going probably right now if it weren't for the whole COVID thing and all the travel restrictions and all those things, because that's also what prevented me from continuing to kind of try and build up the group of faithful there. But my point is just this, that there's so many groups of faithful that or need a priest. And so, and are able to support a priest. I'd say, you're not going to necessarily have an extravagant lifestyle, which obviously is contrary to the priesthood anyway. But I mean, if it's a question of just having a roof over your head and food, and I would say probably even something as basic as just a basic insurance. I mean, I'm confident that that can be provided, and that God will find ways to provide that for the priests. One just has to be willing to do that. So, I mean, if let's say you're a priest and you made the decision, no, I'm going to offer the traditional Latin Mass no matter what. And let's say your bishop, says, okay, you don't have an assignment, or even imposes worse penalties on you. I think that as long as you can weather that storm and you recognize that whatever penalties are imposed on you are certainly not valid before God in the church. I mean, if a bishop suspends a priest because he's committed to only offering the traditional Latin Mass, I mean, I don't think it takes a great brain to figure out that that has absolutely no validity before God and before the Catholic Church, and that in time, in God's time, but in time, that will be corrected. I mean, obviously, I know that's another obstacle. So, but I'm saying if the priest can kind of, let's say, weather that blow, the more practical question of, okay, well, then how do I continue to carry out my priestly ministry? How will I be fed? Where will I live? There are answers out there. I mean, the faithful are asking for priests. You just got to, make that commitment. Okay, I'll help this group of faithful. Obviously, there's still going to be difficulties. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, you've got still canonical issues that you're going to have to be dealing with that are not always easy. How do I continue to do this? How do you try to really live a true priestly obedience in that kind of a situation? Because, I mean, I think we always have to, as priests, in spite of however difficult the situation is, we've got to find ways, the best ways that we can, to still practice that respect and obedience for our superiors and for the hierarchy of the church. There are obviously, it's very unfortunate, but there are obviously all kinds of different divisions, even among the traditional Catholics and traditional groups, that begins to also create other problems. So, I mean, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be rosy and easy, right, but it's certainly doable. There are possibilities. And I think that if we really strive to be faithful, I don't think there's any question that God will provide. He certainly has provided for me, continues to provide for me. I mean, I've been amazed. I mean, I've been even amazed at how I pretty much had to raise like about $250,000 just to be able to acquire a private property and chapel to begin to like build up this work. And I've been amazed at the response of faithful, both within my own diocese and beyond, just their generosity and support. And it's incredible what we're doing right now. I mean, in terms of just to promote the traditional Latin Mass and to be able to, continue this work. But again, I'd say it's all thanks be to God and thanks to His providence. But again, yes, you have to take that. You have to take that. It really is, in a way. I mean, it's kind of simple, and in some ways, maybe, I don't know, a cliche, but it's true. You have to take a leap of faith. I mean, yes, a leap of faith is very important. And just one other comment. I think a lot of times the temptation for us is to discern, for us as priests, to discern these difficult issues in too much of a human way. Kind of, I'd say, too much at the natural level, and saying, well, kind of like what you said, Brian, which I think is true, that you say, well, I don't want to abandon the faith, or what's going to happen, if the modernist priest comes in, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think it's true, and that could very well happen, but I think that we have to put a profound trust also in the fact that if we are making a decision out of true love for God and a desire to be 100% faithful to the Catholic Mass and Catholic doctrine, that in ways that we cannot even understand or foresee, God is going to provide, both for us and for the souls that up to that point, let's say, have been placed into our care. And you never know. I mean, you never know. There may be a conversion in a bishop or two out there. You know, now I'm not counting on it. Again, I'll tell you right now, as bad as things are, I'm certainly not counting on it. But I will say this, look, just in my particular case, and this is something very, very actual. Traditionis Custodes went into effect on July the 16th. Today is August the 4th. So we're talking about 15, 19, almost 3 weeks now, almost 21 days. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to get, a call or something from my bishop tomorrow. I very well could. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if I did. But I will be honest with everyone that's, listening. I definitely had anticipated already to have heard from my bishop, him coming down even harder on me, probably suspending me. But he hasn't. So my point is just, you don't know what's going to happen. See, you can predict and think, well, again, the modernist priest is going to come into my parish and everything's going to be lost. But you don't know that. I mean, again, I would agree that the chances are very high that could happen. I agree that right now we have a extremely serious crisis in the episcopacy. Particularly, I speak mostly in the U.S. It's what I know most about. But I mean, and again, as long as Francis continues there on the See of Peter there, well, the crisis, I think, can only grow more serious because sadly, he's appointing all kinds of, again, to put it in a very charitable way, unsuitable characters for the episcopacy.
Yes.
And so,
but
what
I mean,
hope do we have? What hope do we have of, let's say, having true shepherds that are going to be willing to risk their lives for the faithful and especially for the faith, for the Catholic faith? I'd say not very good, but you still don't know. I mean, we don't know what the future holds.
No, you're right. I mean, humanly speaking, but again, that's why I think the case of Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano is so important, because it is an example of at least one bishop, who has apparently had a conversion, who over the past several years has realized it. And again, miraculously, he says himself, he believed everything about Vatican II and the new Mass up until just a few years ago. So it's, again, improbable, but nothing's impossible with God. And
well, I'm glad to hear that also, because I mean, lately in the last maybe year or so, there's just so much that's been happening that I haven't followed as closely the different statements that Archbishop Vigano has been making. But I'm really glad to hear that, because I wasn't aware that he had said that let's say that he had kind of talked about it as kind of a miracle that up until just a few years ago, he had believed all these things. Because it's interesting you mentioned, I mean, I'm really glad to hear that, because I remember when I think maybe in the first intervention that he made, maybe the very first one, there were a number of things that kind of I wasn't satisfied with, because I kind of was saying, he's kind of seeing this problem of, let's say, the homosexual lobby and all these, but I'm saying, but he's not seeing, let's say, the connection with all of these, let's say, the moral, let's say, corruption in the church, of how that's directly related to the doctrinal corruption and the liturgical corruption. Because I think that's so important, and I think that also goes back even to the question that you raised about the priests that are in this dilemma. I do think that a really big issue, and I think this is, I think particularly, I mean, for all Catholics, but also for us as Catholic priests to discern, is I think we have to really reflect as seriously as we can on the gravity of the crisis in the church.
Yes.
Because I think that the more we realize how grave the crisis is, and I'll tell you, Brian, I personally here give a lot of credit to the Sede Vacantes on this point, because I think that, to their credit, they take seriously the gravity of the crisis in the church. And I think a lot of times other traditional Catholics, I think, fall short. I think that when you really consider how grave the crisis in the church is, I do think you begin to see a lot of these issues a little bit differently. For example, the need to offer exclusively the traditional Latin Mass, no matter what. Yes. And I say this because of what we were talking about in terms of liturgical corruption and doctrinal corruption. I think that when you begin to take more seriously the doctrinal corruption that exists in the mainstream church today, and the liturgical corruption that exists in the mainstream church today, and how it's affecting so many Catholics, many of them, I'd say maybe even to a large extent, sincerely trying to be good Catholics, but they don't know anything differently. And they think that the Novus Ordo is okay because it has the backing of, let's say, the current hierarchy. And because, let's say, their local priest is willing to offer it, even if he's holding his nose. I mean, it doesn't really help the faithful to realize the truth of the grave problems. And again, I'm talking about liturgical corruption, doctrinal corruption, grave problems in the Novus Ordo, and also how the Catholic teaching has been presented today. So I think a lot of it goes back to the gravity of the crisis. I for one, really do see that the crisis is very, very, very grave. And that's also why I'm willing to, let's say, make a lot of different sacrifices. I mean, because I say, look, it's for the good of the church. And even if I have to suffer personally, whether, unjust canonical, let's say, penalties, say, well, you suffer that for the sake of Christ and his church. I mean, the faith, the Catholic faith truly is at stake. And I mean, and I think a perfect example is Traditionis Custodes. I mean, where I wouldn't make any bones about it. I mean, if you really are going to be truthful, set aside all the, the beautiful, the sweet sound, the mellifluous, the sweet sounding language of the document, and ecclesial communion, and trying to make it seem like this is in continuity with the previous popes and in continuity with Vatican II, which that's another whole deception of Traditionis Custodes, making it seem like the Novus Ordo that we have today in pretty much all the parishes, and even the Novus Ordo as it was first promulgated, making it seem as if it has all the authority and backing of Vatican II. I mean, it's like, that's not even true. All you have to do is read Sacrosanctum Concilium, and you see that Sacrosanctum Concilium, sees any possible changes that are made, that you're still preserving the Latin language, you're still preserving Gregorian chant. It's just, a couple of examples. But anyway, the whole point, Traditionis Custodes, when you set aside all the fluff, it basically is a betrayal of Christ. And that's not an exaggeration, because it's a direct contradiction of the liturgical tradition of the Catholic Church that has its roots in it has its apostolic origins. And so it's a direct contradiction of that. It's a direct contradiction of how the supreme pontiffs basically for 2,000 years have exercised their papal authority. And in it being a direct contradiction of our liturgical tradition, a break with our liturgical tradition, a betrayal of our liturgical tradition, that is a betrayal of Christ. I mean, I think we as Catholics have to grow in a greater faith, also in what the holy sacrifice of the Mass is, that this is the sacrifice of Christ. He is the high priest. This is his prayer. I mean, this kind of an attempt to eliminate the traditional Latin Mass, to suppress it and eliminate it, I mean, it really is tantamount to an effort to eliminate the prayer of Christ and the sacrifice of Christ, as the Catholic Church has known it and guarded it and transmitted it faithfully for 2,000 years. It's a betrayal of Christ. And so I think in one of the sermons I spoke about how, the Traditionis Custodes is, it's the kiss of Judas. I mean, it looks nice, it really sounds nice, but it's a betrayal. And I think, again, it's an example of how grave the crisis is in the church today. I mean, I would say, how is it possible that we've come to the point in 2021 that we actually have, supposedly a successor of Peter that goes so far as to do this? I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's just unthinkable. Yes.
Yeah. It's unthinkable.
Yes.
And that should, I think, really bring all Catholics who sincerely want to be good Catholics, to really begin to make an effort to examine what is going on in the church today, and also what has led to this. Because again, this just didn't begin today. I mean, the fact that we have a Francis in 2021 is certainly connected to everything that took place in the Second Vatican Council and in its aftermath.
Well, and that reminds me of one of the things Archbishop Vigano has said. He said, if the Pachamama is worshipped in St. Peter's, it is because of Nostra Aetate. If the Abu Dhabi document was signed by Pope Francis, we have Digitatis Humani. So a very similar thought. But actually, listening to maybe kind of wind up, really what you're saying reminds me very much of a line from a letter issued by Father David Pagliarani, who's the General Superior of the SSPX, which actually in a video message, Archbishop Vigano said almost the same thing, slightly different words. But this is Father Pagliarani's wording. He said, "He who is not prepared to shed his blood for this Mass is not worthy to celebrate it. He who is not prepared to give up everything to protect it is not worthy to attend it." And I think really, on behalf of all of our listeners, I want to thank you, Father, for what you've done, the persecution you've endured for the Mass and for the doctrine that the Mass stands for, because you clearly are showing your worthiness to offer it by being willing to take up those crosses as they come. And as I said, the phone may ring after we hang up this call, so they may be coming. But thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. And for those listening, if you've enjoyed this, please share this video. Again, Father has some very, I think, helpful words for priests and for the laity both. So share it with, priests. What's the worst they can do? They can delete it. Maybe send you an email. Don't send me that again, right? That's a minimal thing to endure. So please share it with people. And as always, if you enjoy the free videos and articles we make available, please consider subscribing to our monthly newspaper, Catholic Family News, where we go into more depth in writing, many of the things we talk about in the free content. So thank you again, Father, for taking much time out of your busy day to speak with us and inspire us at this time.
You're very, very welcome. And definitely please keep me in your prayers, and I definitely will keep you in mind. I think it's very important also that we very much pray for one another, that we also pray for the faithful Catholics that are so desirous of having the traditional Latin Mass, and right now, can't get a priest to offer the Mass for them. So.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. God bless you all, and look forward to seeing you next time.